Thank you so much for joining us today, in person and online. My name is Alex Simakov. I'm the Senior Research Fellow on Energy Environment here at Policy Exchange, the UK's foremost public policy think tank. We're delighted to be joining two of the most important challenges facing Great Britain today, our energy security and our competitiveness in the global climate economy. And to that end, we're honored to have two of the leading voices in the sector joining our panel. To my left is Dr. Nina Skorupska, Chief Executive of the Renewable Energy and Clean Technology Association, previously spent 20 years with RWE's Fuel Engineering and Power Stations, and currently serves as a board member with Transport for London. As well, we have Andrew Bowie, the Member of Parliament for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine since 2017, when he delivered a 20-point swing to become the first Tory to represent the riding in its current formation. He was appointed as the Parliamentary Private Secretary to Prime Minister Theresa May, served as Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party under Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and this February was appointed as the Parliamentary Undersecretary for Nuclear Networks by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Prior to politics, his career involved serving as a sub-lieutenant with the Royal Navy and as a violinist with the National Youth Orchestra of Scotland.
Done your research.
We're assembled here to discuss the matter that's been his focus for the past 6 months, and that's the passage of this government's landmark energy bill. First tabled last July, it was intended as our response to the energy security strategy following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the global energy crisis that caused it. It is, and quite literally, the single longest piece of legislation affecting the energy sector, concerning almost every facet of the industry, from limits on gas flaring to mapping out our carbon storage, from enabling community energy schemes to heat networks, the funding mechanisms to reach our hydrogen strategy, and now a mandate to help reach net zero for Ofgem. Through this government's extensive work across the aisle, first in the Lords and now the Commons, it's undergone extensive amendments and additions. It's also earned praise from the opposition in calls to get this legislation passed to unlock the next steps for our energy future. What started as an initiative to secure a power supply from hostile nations is now as much a matter of ensuring that British industry remains competitive in a global economy that is racing to net zero. For our itinerary this afternoon, Minister Bowie will deliver remarks on his work on this legislation, touch upon its passage through Parliament, and the major updates delivered just yesterday. Then we'll join with Nina for a panel discussion and open the floor to an audience Q&A. Thank you. Minister.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you very much to the Policy Exchange for hosting this discussion this afternoon. It's a genuine pleasure to be here to talk about the energy bill that's currently going through Parliament, which, when I first wrote the speech, I said it's the biggest piece of legislation any government's passed since 2006. As of last week, however, I'm sorry to tell you we've been overtaken by the Digital Markets Bill. However, it is the biggest piece of energy legislation ever. For those that don't know me, and you've had my biography going all the way back to school, from Alex, I have the privilege of being the UK's first ever Minister for Nuclear, which includes the launch of the Great British Nuclear, our new build programme, and our small modular reactor drawdown competition. I'm the Minister for Networks, including the grid and connections, and I'm the Minister responsible for this bill. So as you can imagine, I've been somewhat busy over the past few months. Before I begin, though, I'd like to thank, and I see he's in the audience, James Vitale, who works here at Policy Exchange, for his invitation to speak here today. James and I first met in 2021 when, as chairman of the Cambridge University Conservative Association, he took a group of students to Aberdeenshire to campaign in the Scottish parliamentary election. And I knew then, as a former young politician at university myself, that anybody who was mad enough to trek all the way from his home in Cambridge up to Aberdeen to campaign was going to have either a life in politics or a life in the think tank world, and I seem to have been proved right. So thank you very much, James, for your invitation. The energy bill is the biggest piece of energy legislation ever. It will be transformative for this country, and I think in time the world. It ensures that the UK will be a magnet for CCUS and hydrogen investment. It takes practical steps to further support our nuclear deployment, creates much more competition in our electricity networks, and does much, much more. The sheer breadth and scale of what we are seeking to achieve is reflected in the representation that we have actually in this room today, and indeed joining us online. The representatives drawn from across the energy industry. But this bill is not just a bill for the industry. This bill will, and this is the entire point of the bill, have a real and tangible impact on the British people and British business. And it will deliver a cleaner, more affordable, and most importantly, I think, right now, in the global context in which we speak, a more secure energy system. It will provide investment certainty, enable new jobs, and drive the UK to continue to be a world leader in green energy. And that is why, despite the challenges, I am determined to deliver this bill in this parliamentary session. Now, as a few of you might recognise, there's not many weeks left really in this parliamentary session, so that might seem ambitious. But it has already completed its passage through the Lords and is now in the middle of its Commons Committee stage. For those that don't know, committee stage involves detailed scrutiny of the bill every Tuesday and Thursday, morning and afternoon, by me and other MPs for the next 5 weeks. So far, I'm pleased to report the bill has been well received cross-party in Parliament and outside in the industry. There is genuine cross-party support for ensuring many of the provisions get on the statute book sooner rather than later. As is always the case, there are some amendments to the bill, and we are, of course, carefully looking at the always helpful suggestions being put forward by colleagues. After this, as you know, the bill will return to the whole House for report and third reading, when I'm sure we can expect more helpful amendments to be tabled by colleagues. As most of you here will know, any amendments that have been made to the bill, some were brought forward by government and others were brought forward by other parliamentarians cross-party. On amendments brought forward by the government, over the past few weeks we've tabled amendments on hydrogen transport and storage, direct air carbon capture and storage, energy-intensive industries, and of course, Great British Nuclear. And we saw some amendments made at Lord's report stage. And we've carefully considered the effect that these amendments would have on the delivery of government objectives and indeed the energy market. We've decided to overturn some of those amendments. I know there's been quite a lot in the press about that, and I've tabled my intention to do so. But what I'm delighted to announce here today, although of course it's already in the public domain, it was announced last night and in the press this morning, is that following constructive discussions within Parliament and indeed with industry, we are putting net zero goals at the heart of Ofgem's regulatory decisions by ensuring it refers to net zero targets in the Climate Change Act. In effect, we are mandating Ofgem to have a net zero duty. We have worked closely with Ofgem to table a government amendment to this effect last night with some technical changes to the amendment that was made at Lord's report stage to ensure that it works and to ensure that this doesn't override but will complement Ofgem's principal objective, which will always be to protect consumers. And the best way to protect consumers is by decarbonising the energy system and getting to net zero. So I very much hope and indeed expect this will be welcome news to just about everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, as big as this bill is, I am mindful this is only part of the path for some of our ambitious and further work that will be needed. On gov.uk, we've published a number of policy statements and in some cases draft regulations, such as for competition in onshore electricity networks. These set out our intention of what secondary legislation might look like in the coming years. And many consultations have gone live in parallel to the passage of the bill on future implementation, such as for the future systems operator and the clean heat market mechanism. This puts us on a well-prepared path for laying future regulations and more. And I would like to reassure you that we are very live to the criticality of providing this in a timely manner following royal assent. Look, I do not for one moment doubt the challenge we face as a government, you as an industry, or in fact we as a country face. The scale of what we are seeking to achieve in making our United Kingdom more energy independent, more secure, and of course crucially cleaner is daunting. But I'm convinced, in fact I am more convinced, having had the privilege of holding this position in government since February in this brand new department, that 4 months into it, that we can do it. The bill is big, but it is actually small as a part of the bigger overall effort being made by the incredible, innovative companies across this country, by individuals all across the United Kingdom. So we will get this bill through Parliament, we will implement it soon, and our unparalleled energy sector, British industry, British ingenuity, resilience and determination will, I believe, make our country more secure, our energy cleaner, and our bills cheaper for everyone. And I'd like to thank everybody for what you're doing to make that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Now, the scale of the challenges facing the sector is tremendous, as you've recognized, and there's universal acknowledgement that the transition from a fossil fuel system to a clean electricity system we're going to need deep reforms across the board. But critics have questioned substantiveness of piling onto Ofgem a new duty to consider net zero targets. This would be now the organization's 14th duty to consider. This includes previous duties focusing on the reduction of greenhouse gases and a focus on future consumers. What makes this additional change meaningful? What would be an example of an Ofgem decision or ruling that could have gone differently had they been operating under these new guidelines?
Well, it's not for government ministers to prejudge or indeed retrospectively take a view on a decision that Ofgem may or may not have taken in relation to this duty or to their new duty. But what this duty will allow, and it's from almost the moment I walked through the door of Victoria Street into the department, industry were telling me that what they need, we're in a global race, right? This is not Britain alone doing this. This is the entire world, and on our doorstep, Europe. We're all competing in the same sphere for the same skilled workforce, but critically for the machinery, for the tools, for the tech that will require us to get to net zero and to make our energy system more secure and independent. And we need to be able to allow British business, British industry, who are seeking to develop, to invest, and to produce this this world-leading, this new clean green energy that we are seeking to put at the heart of our baseload. We need to allow them to have the to anticipatorily invest. So anticipatory investment is at the heart of what the new net zero duty will do. It will allow companies to go out and make the investment in the sure knowledge that Ofgem are going to allow them to do so without putting any stringent requirements on them, in terms of will that meet their principal objective of a duty for consumers. This net zero duty will allow companies to go out there in the sure and certain knowledge that they can make those investments, which is crucial in fact, given that we're in a global race for what I've just described.
Nina, a lot of these companies are your members. They've been calling for this decision. Do you see that a duty to consider is moving far enough, or do we need more work from this government in reforming Ofgem for the net zero mandate?
Well, I know Jonathan Brearley, the chief exec, and in his tenure that he's been there, he's been working through Ofgem to get them more aligned. Because as the REA, we'd been calling for this mandate. Well, I've been chief exec 10 years. How about 10 years? We've been asking for that. Because there was always a conflict. Whenever there was a choice between consumer and net zero, of course consumer won. And back 10 years ago, maybe it was right because the price of renewable power and renewable technologies were deemed to be very expensive. But that's a totally different game changer now. There is no conflict, as we've proven, of being able to deliver affordable, clean energy, and we want to talk them to be mandated to be responsible not just for power and gas and heat networks. We want them to be having the regulatory responsibility for heat and cooling as well. Let's not forget, we're going to have to talk about cooling as well, and the prices that will be stimulated by that. So I think this is a great step. I must admit, I skipped on my way to my TfL board meeting, and before I came back here, when I heard this news, I said, at last. Now, obviously, the devil will be in the detail of how, within the culture of Ofgem, how will they now weigh up through their decision matrix trees of whether this fits this or this fits that. There's going to be tensions always, but it's net zero. And that net zero means there still is play in there for fossil with carbon capture usage and storage. If they're going to have a mandate looking at hydrogen as well, fortunately we have now got a low carbon, it's not net zero, we've got a low carbon hydrogen standard in play. So there's a bit of conflict already in terms of what is it that they're going to be working toward. So there's still quite a few areas to tease through. And the Minister kind of said, this bill, it's huge, and we've been waiting for it for a long time. It's building upon the Prime Minister's 10-point plan how many years ago, where we were trying to still convince the oil and gas sector that they needed to do better and reduce their CO2 emissions, and then the energy security strategy, and then obviously the powering up Britain. 3,000-page series of
on my
documents that
desk.
came at the end of March. I've got a fantastic who read it all, praised it and given it to me, and I've read it as well now. And then let's not forget there's Mission Zero, which was Chris Skidmore's advice to the government, which in a way supports the energy bill, absolutely says this about Ofgem having this mandate, but the point that Chris Skidmore's made in Mission Zero, which we support, is everything has to be done much faster. So I applaud the Minister in wanting to get this energy bill through in this parliamentary session. So I'm really, come on, Minister, get on with it. Let's do it.
I'm going as fast as I can.
We've covered a lot of bases in terms of different projects that are underway in the climate transition. One of those is the Future Systems Operator, the FSO. We have some guests here from National Grid, from whom the body will evolve. The legislation calls for it to carry out various functions and activities to achieve the objectives of net zero, security of supply, efficiency, and economy. A lot of that's covered in the existing systems operator as well, and a lot of that sounds like it overlaps with some of the duties that Ofgem's going to have. Can you speak in your vision of how are you going to define that transition from the current model to a future system, and the division of responsibilities between Ofgem and the FSO?
Well, obviously these are, a lot. The exact transition to the FSO will, of course, be a matter for live discussion between the government, between Ofgem, between National Grid and the FSO, the new creation of the FSO, when that takes place. What the bill does is create the regulatory framework for the creation of the FSO, or confusingly and annoyingly in the bill, ISOP. So that will be a discussion for when the regulatory framework is established. But my vision for the FSO, because one of the issues that we have right now, and it's one of the when we talk about the network, for example, in the UK, is that there is a lack of an overarching strategic plan as to where we need to invest, in what we need to invest and where it needs to happen. And the FSO will be responsible for delivering this overarching strategic plan and ensuring that companies are held accountable in feeding into that, and indeed the government is as well. So that's what I see, that one of the main functions of the FSO being. It's something that I think is required. It is a good thing that we're hiving it off from the model as it sits right now. I think it will sit very comfortably alongside Ofgem. I don't think the overlap will be something that need concern us. And as I said, as soon as we get the regulatory framework in place, which this bill does, we can then move on to what will that transition look like. Look, the timescales are pretty impressive, right? We are regulating for the FSO now, and I hope to be able to see the FSO up and running and performing its functions by next year. So yeah,
Brilliant.
Or at least in next year.
Hopefully.
Yes.
In the meantime, National Grid's been busy with probably the biggest challenge facing your members is connection timelines. We can now face up to over a decade to connect an asset that could take us 2-3 years to build. Just this week they came out with a new policy framework for queues called Get On, Get Back, or Get Out of the queue, which I enjoy. Is there more that the government needs to be doing to help resolve some of these queue delays, and what would you like to see coming out of the legislation?
Well, it's great that the ESO has brought that in. And just for everybody's awareness, I've been on the ESO's advisory board for their business planning, advisory council for the business planning for the last 4 years, as they've gone through the various different funding chapters. And we've kind of also been hearing, the push and pull around it becoming an FSO and the ties with the corporate entity of National Grid Group. So there are all of those different interchanges at play, but everybody to a T on that board was saying connection. And then it was almost like 18 months ago they woke up and realised that they didn't have enough resources, enough skills, enough clear signals, or the ability to then go and persuade people who made long ago, connection agreements, and some who have not delivered those projects. And these connection agreements are not just for renewables and clean tech, it's for everything. It's for new towns, it's industry, everything. So there's going to be this almost like a philosophy that you've got to become a priority in that queue system. Get off if you're not going to do it. You won't be fined, because within the previous agreements there were contractual requirements for money to exchange hands for wasting the ESO's time and things like that. And to persuade them to maybe even collaborate, maybe even start to look at the independent network operators who are thinking of coming along And we've always been advocating that they should be favouring connections of those that tread lightly onto the existing grid. So the people who are coming with connections are coming with solutions. So you've got demand and generation coming together, or some kind of flexibility. And that will therefore help the FSO know faster and sooner about then what's the investment for the big build out. But the other level is on the distributed network operators. So 310 gigawatts, I think approximately was one of the numbers that ESO cited of in the connection queue. Well, on the DNOs, it's quite significant as well. I mean, I've just come back from TfL and we're wanting to do lots of EV charging everywhere, rapid charging hubs, new builds, affordable homes, everywhere. And I think that's the same for every single city, Birmingham, Liverpool, Newcastle, the whole lot. And it's aligning the distributed network operators to really understand how they have to mimic what the future system operator is going to do. So we've seen UKPN announce just 2 weeks ago that they were hiving off a DSO, so that they will be looking about how people can play in a local distributed market as well. So there's a lot more yet to come, but there's some positive signs.
Well, I mean, on that, this is there's a lot of challenges in the energy sphere right now, and you know, we were drawing up a list today of the challenges facing the department and the challenges facing the sector in general. It all seems to fall on my desk, which is, you know, great news for me. But the bigger challenge that we face is the connections.
Yes,
I genuinely believe that our inability to connect projects to the grid, and from a distributed network operator's perspective as well, will hold us back in terms of all of the ambitious timescales that we've got to deliver the projects that we have set out on right now. And you've talked about EV charging points, we've talked about new battery storage facilities, and all the rest, which need connections. And just yet, we've got Nick Windsor's review coming out in a few months' time, which I think will be welcome in terms of how we have connection times and how we look at the planning and consenting mechanism in the country to speed those things up. We've also, I chaired a roundtable yesterday with, you know, voices from every conceivable part of industry about how we can, and Ofgem, about how we can work together prior to the creation of the FSO to reduce connection times. I am fully aware the government is absolutely committed to running down connection times, because it is, as I said, such a challenge that one of the spats was a nightmare. I don't know if it was a nightmare or not, but certainly it dreamt about me drowning in network cables last week. That is the big challenge that we had. It is not quite worrying actually, but that is how on top of the mind it is in the department right now.
If I can come back a little bit, I mean, I don't do a told you so too often, but as the REA, we had been banging on about this way back in 2016 and 2017. But unfortunately, in that period of time, it coincided with the bonfire of the policies where feed-in tariffs were kicked into touch. Lots of other things all went awry because the levy control framework had been overspent. So there'd been lots of cuts and jabs and everything like that. And yet Ofgem were doggedly coming along and saying, let's look at how we look at this particular code. You know, and I'm an engineer, and I still need to go on a translation course to understand the acronyms and the written, and very important from a safety point of view, but contractual requirements for how to manage our grid system. This is not a light and mean feat, but we were talking about it back then, and here we are in 2023, and what is it? Net zero power by 2035 we want to deliver, and the Labour wants to do it by 2030. So, yeah.
Minister, on the topic of levies, there was a lot of discussion yesterday, not just an Ofgem, but a levy for another series of
No
expenses.
idea where you might be going with this question.
No idea at all. A lot of ambitions in the hydrogen space, big target for 2030 on 10 gigawatts. Question, I think we have a sector that's very ready to move on. The question of how we pay for it is to be answered. What have you taken away from those discussions, and your view on how to best fund those targets, and can you get Treasury on board with that view?
Well, yes, we can. Look, one of the things actually that we haven't touched on, and it's something that I think that maybe as a government and as a sector we are quite introspective, and we talk to ourselves a lot about the challenges that we face. One of the things we've got to recognise, and in fact it hasn't really been mentioned here at all, we've talked about the benefits of what we're doing for the British people. But we need to take the British people on this journey with us. Right? So they need to see and to feel that the investments that we are making and spending time legislating for, and everything that we are doing as a government, will actually benefit them, and that net zero is, a good thing. I think most people sign up to that, but also explain that what we are going to have to do to get to net zero. I don't think we have, as a sector, I put this challenge to people in this room, but yes, as a government as well, really engage in that conversation with the British people. And I think that is why we've got to the place that we've got to on the discussion around the hydrogen levy. We, yesterday in committee stage, we moved to remove the Lords Amendment to the levy, which would have put the duty onto gas shippers. But the problem with that is that it would, essentially, they would, we predict, we think we know, in effect, put the pass that down to consumers. And so it would be a levy by the back door. So, people's bills would go up anyway. I think we've got to recognise that, of course, people are worried about their energy bills. We are worried about people's energy bills to such an extent that this year we spent £1,500 per person mitigating the effects of soaring energy prices and skyrocketing energy bills, which everybody in this country was worried about. So we don't want to do anything that's going to increase energy bills. What I can say is, on the levy, discussions are ongoing as to what a mechanism to inject capital into this vital sector will eventually look like. Discussions are ongoing right now, and as it stands, the levy, as first drafted, is what is on the face of the bill. However, as I say, discussions are ongoing as to what eventually that will look like and where we'll end up. But this government is absolutely alive to, and has already acted to, mitigate the effects of high energy bills, and we don't want to do anything that will put a further burden on the British people. And at the same time, we've got to start explaining what it is we're trying to do.
And where we'll end up, the plan is to publish the hydrogen business models no sooner than 2025. In the meantime, since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act last year and the EU's Green New Deal, we've seen tens of billions of dollars and euros invested into their hydrogen economies, putting the British sector at a bit of a pause. Can we expect to see interim business models released in advance of the full program in 2025, whether for transport or storage, or a decision on heat decarbonization?
Well, we've already legislated for hydrogen transport and storage. I say we've already legislated. We have added an amendment into the bill at committee stage that moves that part of the sector, and we hope forward builds the regulatory framework for that. One of the first things I did in my previous job, which was as Minister for Exports, was attend the Green Trade Investment Expo up in Gateshead. There was hundreds of companies and individuals at that, demonstrating the great inventiveness, ingenuity, and indeed leadership that companies in this country are showing to the world in terms of green, clean tech, new technology that will drive down emissions, make us more energy independent, more energy secure. We take these companies and these technologies to forums like COP, and the rest of the world looks in awe at what we're doing in this country. So of course, we don't want IRA to stymie the investment that's coming into this country. We want to build on that. I know that the Prime Minister is discussing how that we can do that indeed with the President in the United States this week. I don't see IRA as a threat. I see it as a challenge. I like the model that we have in this country right now. And by the way, as I said, hugely successful. We've got the first, second, third, and fourth largest wind farms in the world off the coast of the United Kingdom. Some of the best new technologies are being developed here in the UK. Of course, we've got to ensure that the capital and the investment in the tech and the skilled labour force doesn't migrate across the Atlantic due to the sheer hundreds of billions of dollars now being thrown at this technology. But the reason that the Americans are having to throw hundreds of billions of dollars at these projects because they haven't done anything for the last 20 years, really, to the extent that we have, because we've had such a successful model, be that through the CFD or whatever else it is, encouraging private enterprise, doing what we can to develop and support British ingenuity and inventiveness. And I hope that what we're doing through this bill will continue to do that, as we also, government, look at the challenges that are thrown up by the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Mm-hmm.
across the pond.
Nina, is our hydrogen sector keeping pace with our peer economies?
Sorry?
Is our hydrogen sector keeping pace with peer economies?
Again, we need this energy bill to go through, which then gives confidence to the people who are investing in hydrogen. We have our heritage in the REA is we've represented green gas, biogas producers, and we've set up all the rules of green gasification, of how to inject into the gas network, demonstrate quality, demonstrate that they are low carbon or net zero carbon now. And we want to bring to bear all of those kind of models to ensure that net zero hydrogen really has a fair crack here in the UK. And we've got to also remember, why are we doing hydrogen as well? Of course, export, technology, skills, just transition from the oil and gas sector. If we talk about carbon capture, usage and storage, on the hydrogen formed from steam methanization, and if the oil and gas companies also address, as you mentioned, methane flaring upstream and methane leakage, then we're getting close to that low carbon hydrogen coming from that channel. But we've got so many members who are in NEM technology, the electrolyzers, and the technologies are blossoming. Everybody's coming out, well, I've got the next best thing that uses a different types of rare material or mineral, because we've got to look at everything from end to end. Mm-hmm. But we do need, the business model legislation to be in, to demonstrate to people to stay and to grow that sector here. I have colleagues in my old company at RWE who are kind of over out in working in Saudi Arabia doing the Mile City, the NEOM project. They didn't come to the UK, and no matter how much I told them about a particular member, they went back to tried and tested friends in Germany and took their technology out there. And that's because they couldn't wait. They couldn't wait. And that's the point about the UK is a leader and showing leadership. Our legislation is second to none on that. The trouble is everybody's catching up. And if we want to remain leaders, we've got to get this stuff sorted and done, and a market framework. One thing we haven't talked about today, which links more to power than hydrogen, is getting REMA, the review of the electricity market arrangements, sorted. There's another, I don't know how even to describe that one. It is a huge issue. And everybody wants it to be better, but then when you go and talk, even to my members, are we going to do something radical? Should we change it? Oh, no, don't touch it because of existing assets. That'll undermine, our 15-year business plan and so on and so on. So it is a tricky thing to do.
It is.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to take the questions to the floor now. If you could please state your name and your organizations. Thank you very much. Let's start with Jack up front.
Hi, thanks, Alex. Jack Richardson from Onward. You've asked my levy question. Thank you very much. So I'll move on to the next one. So slightly tangential to the bill, but you said that there's lots of work all around it going on, and a big part of that is planning reform. But the thing with planning reform is you can come up with all the great ideas, but as long as there's political support behind it. And the reason why onshore wind was banned in the first place was particularly due to Conservative backbenchers, but there's problems with support for planning reform across the party, like Lib Dems are terrible NIMBYs. The Green Party...
You might say that, Jack. I couldn't possibly comment.
So what is the government alive to that about making the case to its own backbenchers that we need to build solar farms, we need to build onshore wind farms, need to have storage, most importantly need to have all that grid infrastructure, especially for the offshore wind that's going to be coming on in East Anglia?
I don't want to prejudge the work that Nick Windsor is going to be publishing in a few months' time. I think it will be quite radical. I think it could present challenges to government, absolutely. But it will give us a lot of the, I hope anyway, it will give us the path to the solutions for some of the challenges that we're facing, particularly in planning and consenting. It's really important, by the way, that that communities are involved in this. And this is what I mean when we talk about, taking people with us, engaging in that conversation. Ask the average person in the street, do you believe in net zero? Absolutely. What does that mean? we've just been really bad at actually selling that. It means that we're going to have to build, significant amount of infrastructure in this country to get us to where we need to get to. So we need to take people with us on that journey. It's not about imposing things on them. It's about taking, as I said, take people with us on that journey, on that conversation, having that discussion. And we do that by, for example, we're consulting right now on community benefits. So what will, not for the benefits that one community would like to receive for hosting a piece of critical national infrastructure, such as a new substation, will not fit another community. So we need to be a lot more flexible in what we're offering, how it operates, who actually is in charge of distributing it, if it is money, into local communities on the ground. So that sort of thing is ongoing right now. So these are discussions that we're having. It's not about imposing things on people, it's about taking people with us and engaging in that national conversation right now. And as I said, Nick Windsor, I think we should all wait and see what Nick comes. I don't know what's in Nick's. He's keeping his cards very close to his chest, but I do know that's going to be radical and challenging, and so I think we should wait for that in the next couple of months.
But it's only about the transmission system.
Yes, but that is huge.
So that takes account of our backbone and
Yeah.
ribs.
Yes.
If I want to describe it that
No,
way.
no, it's right.
But it doesn't describe, the veins of how everything's going to flow right down into people's own houses and their connections.
Yeah.
And I know there are some amendments going into the energy bill
Mhm.
around community energy schemes as well. And I think that would be a really great flag to show that we're really listening to communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because at the moment, different energy supply companies are running roughshod over people who are the prosumers.
Mhm.
If you've got your own solar in your home, EV charger, battery, whatever, for the people who can afford to do it. I'll quickly add that before we talk about all other ways of doing it in affordable houses. They get what they're given in terms of a SEG, a sustainable export guarantee price.
Mhm.
And it just doesn't incentivise enough. So there are other little signals that would demonstrate to the public that this is worth stepping out of here and learning about what it means for you absolutely personally. So then when somebody comes knocking on the door and saying, we're going to put a great big AC/DC cable coming through here because we want to connect north, south, east, west, coast to on land. Oh, and by the way, there's going to be a hydrogen pipeline maybe coming through here, and then maybe a CO2 one to back it up because they're not the same. Let's sow the seeds first, and then everything's more willing.
On community energy, I couldn't agree more, and it's a live discussion.
Good, I'm glad to hear it. Oh, blimey.
Gentleman in the middle on the right. We can do two questions as
Thank
well.
you. Michael Johansson, Grayling Communications. I was wondering if the Minister could confirm when the government's going to set out further details or consult on the design of a mechanism to enable investment in large-scale, long-duration storage. I think it was set out last August that there's plans to do that.
I cannot, off the top of my head, give you a direct answer to when we're seeking to do that. However, as I said, we did set it out last year. It is still our intention to consult on that, and I would be happy to find a way to contact you with a fuller answer to your question.
I think that's a really important topic, long duration. There's a bit of a bun fight about what is long duration energy storage definitions as well. The role of hydrogen, the role of RUF. Amongst the academics, they're fighting over whether you should store and then pipe hydrogen to where it's needed, or some of the case being made is everybody has their own electrolyzer or something of hydrogen, and then you start bringing in the water sector along the lines of that. I think one of the points around when you pick a particular technology, it's about all those cascading or the ripples it causes and impacts on all the other things. And that's what I love about the REA. We don't just talk about a single technology, we look about what's the outcomes and the solutions and what are the right technologies to bring to bear to deliver for that area, for that region, for the nation. So I think you'll find now you'll have the farmers interested in that because they'll be going, oh yes, we can do some kind of energy storage, because they think biogas is storage, because it is, and they'll start becoming even more like chemical industry plants on our green and pleasant fields. I think it's such an interesting landscape, and those boundaries between individual sectors are completely blurring.
Yeah, they are. Interesting.
Matt, do you have a question? Oh, you already got your just right up front. So go ahead.
Thank you. I won't take very long. Toby Aykroyd, representing environmental interests, but I also used to be director of the Association of Independent Businesses. You were talking, Minister, about the importance of public trust, confidence in what you're doing, and it's a very well laid out, well balanced bill. There is one area of controversy, however, although it only applies to a very small area of energy generation, and that's solid bioenergy, usage of trees, and Drax in particular, if I can mention, which is fairly iconic. You spent 1,500 million in the last 2 years on subsidies to one station alone, power station. Drax was removed from the Dow S&P Clean Energy Index 2 years ago because of its carbon emissions. Its own advisors more recently told it could no longer call its output carbon neutral. And as you know, Ofgem have launched an inquiry into the sustainability criteria for its sourcing. What are your intentions within the ambit of the bill for solid bioenergy?
That's an incredibly good question. Look, I mean, at the minute, Ofgem are going through an investigation process right now, and I don't think I should say anything that might influence that as it pertains to that particular sector, or indeed a particular case. And I have to be very careful of what I say, given that that investigation is ongoing right now, so I would be reluctant to give any more comment on that just now, but I'm sure you can.
I certainly can, Cameron, because you know, the sustainability criteria of using bioenergy, and it's not just me saying it, you know, across internationally, our own CCC, Climate Change Committee, all are really clear that there has to be a role for sustainable bioenergy with some form of carbon capture if we want to really achieve net zero. And bioenergy comes in lots of forms. You pick on Drax, but I can also say, because you pick on Drax worked the hardest to try and make sure it doesn't infringe, and has worked across Europe and internationally on establishing the sustainability goals. My background is coal, really, coal-fired power stations, and the only way we got to where we're saying now around achieving over 40% renewable power is because we shut off coal, and the way that we did that was the government to be supportive of saying, we can't just ask you to stop using coal because we work in a market. We have to compensate you for using more expensive fuel, which is bioenergy because of its energy content, to stop using coal and use this instead. And that's what then got one of the biggest power plants in Europe to stop being a major carbon emissions emitter. But you have to believe in the full carbon life cycle and the chain and around where carbon is emitted and where it's collected. So that's why the sustainability criteria is absolutely has to be rock solid, and I would kick out any member from the REA who did not adhere to those sustainability criteria, and my members know that.
As a very quick supplementary, if you don't mind, I don't need a microphone. Philip Dunn's Environmental Audit Committee, Minister, your colleague, determined in November that the emissions from coal were 1 kilogram more per kilowatt hour than bioenergy, forest bioenergy, 1 kilowatt more per hour than 1 kilogram more per kilowatt hour than coal.
I think that's them because of the view of you're only looking at the emissions at the stack rather than looking at the whole carbon life cycle, and the fact that the resource, the fantastic resource of managed forests that we want to use, and obviously we also want to encourage more sustainable buildings, and people are turning to actually building more buildings from timber, and therefore there's going to be an awful lot more waste to have to manage as well. Why not make sure we use it very, very well in lowering our net zero target ambitions and delivering energy in this form? We also have biogas from farm. We've got locally farmed, fast-growing coppice as well. There's all the recycling of plastics, if you want to really touch into that one, and how to ensure the whole waste sector stops exporting this valuable resource, and we really have the policies and the regulation and the framework that enable us to optimise the resource, to use it in the right place for the right time for the right solution.
Speaking as a Canadian and having worked with some of the forestry sector that provides some of the fuel for BECCS and the other direct operations, that revenue stream has enabled them to actually expand forest coverage across Canada, because that revenue has been able to provide tree rehabilitation and wildlife rehabilitation services. So we have a larger carbon sink. That should be part of the equation. And in one of those studies, that wasn't considered
it wasn't
whatsoever. It was only at the source. So I think that's irrelevant.
Introduce you to a few people.
I have no doubt you could. I have no doubt. I'd like to go online for a moment as well. We have a question from Daniel Scharf, if he's still online.
Thank you. Yes, Daniel Scharf, One Planet Abingdon Climate Emergency Centre. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Daniel. Go ahead.
Okay. The Minister mentioned carbon negative technologies. I just wonder if the rebound effect has been taken into account in your carbon budgets, that take out carbon from the atmosphere and it comes back from the saturated oceans.
Sorry, you're talking about direct air capture?
If you're going to capture carbon,
Yep.
negative carbon technologies, you
Yep.
take it out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it returns from the ocean because the ocean's been absorbing it for so many years. So that's a rebound effect. I just wonder how much that had been taken into account in your carbon budgets that I assume underpin the whole bill.
Sorry, do you have an answer?
No, I understand what he's saying, because again, it is about balance and, you know, the temperatures, the flow, the capacity of the oceans to absorb all the different atmospheric gases that we see, and as temperature increases or decreases in the balances. So I think he's anticipating a time when we are maybe taking such large volumes of CO2 from direct air capture, which would cause an almost a tipping of a balance going the other way, so that we never actually reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere, but it continues.
But I mean, this is it's like direct air capture, capture and utilization storage. It's a nascent industry, really. We're at the very beginning of this journey, and everybody acknowledges that we need to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And one way of doing that is through direct air capture. It's really important that we've tabled the amendment that actually enables a regulatory framework for that in that sector to grow. And so we can take that carbon dioxide out of the air, and that there's a role there for the existing oil and gas industry and others, because we're going to be reliant on some form of fossil fuel to a certain degree for many, many years. So how can we reduce the impact of, for example, that industry? And that is by utilising some of these new technologies being made available through the development of direct air capture. And I think I understand now what Daniel was driving at, but I think that stage that you are cautioning off is a long way off, if ever. And the imperative now is to reduce our carbon emissions and get the technologies, getting them developed to enable us to do that.
I think as well, we have an awful lot of those technologies today, but we mustn't stop innovating and thinking about it.
Yeah.
And the tension I find here with the UK government, I've worked in the Netherlands and in Germany as well, and in other places around the world, is that we tend to go and say, this is the one big thing. So like hydrogen is at the moment, is the big, I mean, I know you cover nuclear, but I'm avoiding that topic, thank you.
You're not a fan of nuclear?
No, I used to be responsible for a nuclear power plant in the Netherlands. But whether more should be built and where the money should be spent, it is all about the economy of it all, and also time. We are in 2023, I can't labour that point enough. And legislation takes 2-3. REMA is anticipated to take at least another 3-4 years to go through. Yeah. That gives us so much less time in order then to have that market, that framework, that infrastructure for even more technologies to be deployed that we know of today.
What I would say though is that we only legislated for net zero in 2019, and here we are in 2023 with the largest energy bill ever. And so the pace that we have moved, you know, we do lead, but sometimes we don't actually say this enough, I don't think. I mean, we, as I said, first to fourth largest offshore. I know you do, but I think in general, we as a country, for some reason we hide our light under a bushel, and we are not as good as we should be or could be actually setting out what we have achieved in such a short period of time. Yes, of course, organisations like yours have been calling for us to do this for about 10 years. It took a while for government to catch up, but we got there, and we have moved, for government, by the way, incredibly fast since that initial net zero legislation was passed in 2019 by Chris Skidmore. By the way, we're not even 4 years from that point, that being passed, and here we are talking about all these amazing technologies, leading the G7 in terms of cutting our carbon emissions, and we've done so much, and this bill will enable us to do even more.
I usually do try to say a few numbers here, purely from a renewable energy point of view, so forgive me for that. So if I said now, and I think the government quoted a number about what was achieved in the last quarter from renewable power, and that was about 46.5%. Mm-hmm. So that was nicely tweeted and put on LinkedIn, that, you know, the first quarter of this year, 46.5% renewable power. But what do these numbers mean for you? 8.5% and 3%. 8.5% is how much renewable heat we actually deliver in this country today, right? And guess what the 3 is? You've got to guess what the 3 is. That's how much renewable transport we deliver. So let's just do the math. 97% is a big number to go at, and therefore we need all the tricks in the book here now in order to deliver that future and fast.
Yeah.
The questions on timeline for nuclear is interesting. I was yesterday just reviewing tweets from Caroline Lucas in 2011 saying we shouldn't invest in nuclear because it could take up to 10 years to build. Would have been I
could be cutting the ribbon at Hinkley Point C today if we'd done it in 2011. It wasn't for her. It wasn't just her. You shouldn't put all the blame on Caroline.
Question from Jason.
Hi, Jason Speedy from Ideal Heating. We're very proud to be at the forefront of heat pump rollout, and obviously very interested in what's come out in the consultation for the Clean Heat Market Mechanism. Mm-hmm. And to pick up Nina's exact point there, to accelerate the rollout of heat pumps in particular, we absolutely support. But what that brings with it is obviously enormous fines. My question is, how does industry balance our desire for continued investment in UK jobs, in UK manufacturing and R&D against this backdrop of the potential enormous penalties?
Yeah, I think there's a question about how the industry responds. It's probably a question more directed at you, but just to say that heat pumps are going to provide, you know, the solution. It's how we make, the big challenge is how we make them affordable. Right. That is the biggest challenge that we face in terms of heat pumps. It can be done. Look at Sweden and Germany. I think my father-in-law in Sweden had his heat pump installed about 40 years ago. We are playing catch-up here. So,
and I absolutely agree. I mean, I talk with the senior civil servants responsible for clean heat, and you know they're wanting to make sure that the heat pump rollout is done as quickly and as fast as possible. But it still is about people being convinced and to overcome the naysayers, people who absolutely say that, you know, these type of homes could never have a heat pump or what, you know, so there's all that going on in there. But the budget though that the government provided a while ago was enough for 30,000 heat pumps, and what was the number the government set out for? 600,000?
About that,
by 2030. Yeah. Only 15,000 though was taken up in that grant, 15,000. So we are a long way. So something has to be unpicked in order to find that lever. It is skills, it is awareness, it is about true and honest science-based facts. You know, I go on Twitter at my peril, but I have a fantastic, I have a fantastic person who I think is a champion, is Carbon Brief, who just take any diddly squat old facts and then is able to do it. You know, I have discussions with them about sustainable bioenergy, of course, but everybody's listening, and it's about facts and science. So we've got to make sure that people are aware that heat pumps do work in this country at all temperatures and across the majority of buildings.
Yes, they do.
But I need to say, we're really behind in terms of heat networks, deep geothermal, sustainable biogas being used on heat networks where you can convert a CHP plant. People are maybe waiting until hydrogen appears, so they might think that they can delay. So there is a lot to balance and juggle and create that pathway through. For me, I would never prescribe a particular technology, create the right framework, the funding mechanism in the market.
That's what we're trying to do
I know.
right now.
Faster.
Yes. Okay. All right. Noted. On by the way, on your 15,000 point, look, Minister Lord Martin Callanan, he's very aware of this.
Yeah, I know.
And he's working very, very hard with officials and with industry to drive up that number of people who are applying for the grants to get heat pumps installed. Yeah, okay, the 600,000 target and the 30,000 people that may be available for a grant, these numbers obviously don't add up, but we need to go much further and faster. He's very much aware of that.
One last question here up front with Utility Week.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, thank you. Dave Blackman, Boris. Oh, thank you. Policy correspondent for Utility Week. Like colleague here, Adam took a fair few of my questions at the beginning, but I'd like to pick up on something that Nina said. She was talking about the elongation of the REMA process. How would you respond to very deep industry concerns about the fact that the options within REMA haven't been narrowed down sufficiently yet? A year after the first policy paper came out, and also that we don't expect to see any progress on that process until the autumn, and with all the uncertainty that brings about for big companies' business models.
So, as we just said a few minutes ago, this is an incredibly complex and complicated area, and it's really important that we take the time to get it right, what we are doing. Yes, more detail will be brought forward in the autumn. I understand that seems like a long way away, but actually it's only a couple of months away in reality. We are moving as fast as I think we can with industry, so as not to do anything that might, have a negative impact on companies and indeed the sector in its entirety. This is one of the most important things that we as a government and subsequent governments will be involved, because this will be carrying on this process post-election. So when the Conservative Party is re-elected into government after the next election, this will be carrying on, and it's right that we take our time. I understand absolutely the concerns from businesses within the sector, but it is precisely because we are cognizant of the inherent risk in terms of moving faster on this for those businesses that we are taking our time to do this properly and do it right, because REMA is something that must be done right. I don't know if you have anything to say.
It'll be interesting to see how the Secretary of State, Grant Shapps, will feel the pressure in autumn, because last winter, earlier winter, he promised about the decoupling of gas, fossil gas, from the electricity price, which is what really ratcheted up the energy bills for people in their home and drove all of that. So there's we haven't forgotten, there are a few promises out there, but you can't do that without the knock-on effect. Like the pebble thrown in the pond, the ripples could be just a little ripple, or it could be a major, tidal wave and all the water's knocked out of the pond. So how do we do it in the right way, but at pace again, where people clearly understand those matters? There's still quite a few sages who introduced neater and better a long time ago and had to trade around that. We've still got some inequalities around carbon pricing, and there's going to be pressure on the government to not want to put a carbon price on gas and everything like that, and the bills, and look at it and get a full valuation of what's the carbon content of hydrogen in the future, because we've got to be thinking of all that now as we start to think of REMA, because it impacts everything. The regional locational pricing, I think, is the signals there that I know Ofgem and ESO have made the case for, and yeah, this sounds right. People give the right signals, go and connect there. It's not as simple as that. It really isn't, because then there's the balancing market, then there's the capacity market to think about, and then there's the half-hourly signals that we want to get through to every single consumer and industry to be doing the right thing as well. Some of them already are, but it's not a mass consideration. So there's all these layers and layers that have to be understood, that if you change this, how does it impact that over there, and the unintended consequences?
Minister, we had California's adopted it. My own province of Ontario is moving towards LMP. How do you feel about LMP if you were the one holding the pen to make the decision?
Well, I'm not the one holding the pen to make that decision. Look, my focus is on getting this bill across the line. My focus is on getting this bill to Royal Assent as soon as we possibly can, and making sure that the regulatory frameworks for Great British Nuclear, for the FSO, for everything else that we're seeking to achieve, for the establishment of a carbon capture, utilisation and storage industry in this country, for the development of direct air capture, for whatever mechanism we eventually come to or decide upon to support the hydrogen industry in this country. My focus, and not my sole focus, because there's a lot more going on in the energy sphere as is, and I've got to think about the creation of a brand new nuclear industry in this country, almost starting from scratch. But my primary focus over the next few months is getting this bill across the line. I will leave the decision on that for the Secretary of State and others.
I think we'll agree that's probably enough. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, Ian, for joining us, and thank you to the audience. We really appreciate you coming by today.
Thank you. Cheers.